I never thought a simple piece of paper could turn my world upside down. When Mrs. Henderson, the director of Little Sunshine Daycare, handed me that sealed envelope with my name written in her careful cursive, my hand started trembling before I even opened it. My 3-year-old daughter, Emma, had been acting strange for weeks, and I'd been getting those looks from the other parents during pickup time. You know the ones. The sideways glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when I walked by, the way they seemed to shield their children when Emma tried to play with them. I thought I was prepared for whatever that letter might say, but nothing could have prepared me for what I found inside. If you've ever felt like you were failing as a parent, share your story in the comments below. Sometimes we need to hear that we're not alone in our struggles. And if this is your first time here, please subscribe to help support this channel. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday. I was rushing around the kitchen, trying to pack Emma's lunch while she sat at the table, methodically picking the blueberries out of her muffin and arranging them in perfect little rows on her plate. She'd been doing things like that more and more lately, organizing her toys by color, insisting her socks be pulled up to exactly the same height, having complete meltdowns if her routine was disrupted by even 5 minutes. The pediatrician had assured me it was just a phase, that some children were naturally more particular than others. But deep down I knew something was different about my little girl. Emma had always been quiet, preferring to observe rather than jump into activities with the other children. At home, she was my chatty, curious little companion, full of questions about everything from why the sky was blue to how many seeds were in an apple. But according to her teachers, she barely spoke at daycare. During pickup, I'd watch through the window as other children ran to their parents with painted masterpieces and stories about their day, while Emma would sit quietly in the corner, often playing alone with blocks or puzzles. The other parents had started to notice too. Last week at the playground, I'd overheard Sarah Martinez telling another mom that Emma was weird and that her son Tyler didn't want to play with her anymore. The words hit me like a physical blow. I wanted to march over there and defend my daughter, to explain that she was just shy, just needed time to warm up, but the doubt was already creeping in. Was there something wrong with Emma that I was missing? Was I failing her somehow? That's when the behaviors at home started escalating. Emma began having massive tantrums when I tried to change her routine, screaming for hours if I took a different route to the store or if her favorite cup was in the dishwasher. She started covering her ears during normal conversations, saying everything was too loud even when I was speaking in whispers. Simple tasks like getting dressed became battlegrounds, with Emma insisting that her shirt tags were hurting her and that certain fabrics felt wrong against her skin. I'd started dreading the daily pickup from daycare, knowing I'd face another report about Emma's difficult behavior. Mrs. Rodriguez, her teacher, would greet me with a strained smile and launch into descriptions of Emma's refusal to participate in circle time, her meltdown during art class when her hands got messy, or her tendency to wander away from group activities to line up crayons or sort puzzle pieces by shape and color. The guilt was eating me alive. Other mothers seemed to have it all figured out. Their children skipped happily into daycare each morning and came home with stories and friendships, and muddy clothes from playground adventures. Meanwhile, I was arguing with a 3-year-old about why she couldn't wear the same dress 7 days in a row and why she needed to eat something other than plain pasta for dinner. My husband Mark tried to be supportive, but I could see the worry in his eyes too. He'd suggest different parenting books or wonder aloud if we were being too permissive, too strict, too something. We'd lie awake at night whispering about whether we should seek professional help, but neither of us wanted to admit that our beautiful, intelligent daughter might need something we couldn't provide. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago during the daycare's monthly family picnic. All the families gathered in the park behind the center for games and food, and I'd been looking forward to it as a chance for Emma to interact with her classmates in a more relaxed setting. Instead, it became a nightmare that replayed in my mind every night since. Emma had been doing well initially, quietly eating her sandwich while watching the other children play. But when the organized games started, everything fell apart. The first activity involved all the children sitting in a circle while music played, and when the music stopped, they were supposed to freeze like statues. Emma lasted about 30 seconds before the combination of the loud music, the unpredictable stopping and starting, and the expectation to perform triggered a complete meltdown. She started screaming and covering her ears, rocking back and forth in a way that made my heart break. When I tried to comfort her, she pushed me away and continued screaming. The other children stopped playing to stare, and their parents began gathering their own kids closer, as if Emma's distress might be contagious. One father actually said loud enough for me to hear, "Maybe they should keep kids like that at home until they can handle being around others." I scooped Emma up and carried her to the car while she continued to scream and kick, feeling the eyes of every parent burning into my back. The 20-minute drive home felt like hours, with Emma sobbing in her car seat about how the music was wrong, and her clothes felt scratchy, and everything was too much. By the time we got home, we were both emotionally exhausted. That night, after Emma finally fell asleep clutching her favorite stuffed elephant, I sat on my bed and cried harder than I had since she was born. I felt like I was drowning in my own inadequacy, convinced that I was somehow ruining my child's development through my failures as a mother. Mark held me while I sobbed about feeling isolated from the other parents, about dreading social situations because I never knew when Emma might have a meltdown, about the constant worry that I was doing everything wrong. The next few weeks at daycare were tense. I could feel the judgment from other parents more acutely than ever, and Emma's behaviors seemed to be escalating. Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned that Emma had started hiding under tables during loud activities and that she'd bitten another child when he tried to take a toy she was organizing. The incident report felt like a formal declaration of my failure as a parent. Then came the phone call that I'd been dreading. Mrs. Henderson asked if I could come in for a meeting, and her tone suggested this wasn't going to be a casual chat about Emma's progress. I spent the entire drive to the daycare convinced that they were going to ask us to find somewhere else for Emma to go, that my daughter was being expelled from preschool before she'd even learned to write her name. When I walked into Mrs. Henderson's office, she was sitting behind her desk with a warm smile that immediately confused me. I'd been preparing for stern disapproval, maybe even a lecture about getting Emma professional help before she could return. Instead, Mrs. Henderson gestured for me to sit down and asked how I was doing. Not how Emma was doing, but how I was handling everything. The question caught me completely off guard, and before I could stop myself, I was pouring out all my fears and frustrations. I told her about the sleepless nights, the constant worry that I was failing Emma, the isolation I felt from other parents, the guilt that consumed me every time someone commented on Emma's behavior. Mrs. Henderson listened without judgment, nodding occasionally and making supportive sounds that encouraged me to keep talking. When I finally ran out of words, she reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder. Inside was a collection of papers, forms, and what looked like research articles. She explained that she'd been observing Emma carefully over the past several weeks, not to build a case against her, but to understand her better. Mrs. Henderson had been working in early childhood education for over 20 years, and she recognized patterns in Emma's behavior that I hadn't seen. She showed me charts documenting Emma's responses to different activities, noting that she thrived in quiet, structured environments but struggled with sensory-rich or unpredictable situations. She pointed out Emma's incredible focus and attention to detail, her advanced problem-solving skills, and her ability to see patterns that other children missed. What I had been viewing as problematic behaviors, Mrs. Henderson was presenting as evidence of Emma's unique way of experiencing and processing the world. Then she said something that stopped my heart. She thought Emma might be on the autism spectrum, specifically what used to be called Asperger's syndrome. She was careful to explain that she couldn't diagnose Emma herself, but her observations suggested that my daughter's brain worked differently than typical children, and that wasn't something to fix, but something to understand and support. My first reaction was denial mixed with relief. Denial because autism felt like such a big, scary word that I wasn't ready to apply to my bright, beautiful daughter. Relief because finally someone was telling me that Emma's struggles weren't my fault, that I hadn't broken my child through inadequate parenting. Mrs. Henderson must have seen the storm of emotions crossing my face because she quickly reassured me that autism wasn't a tragedy or a limitation, but simply a different way of being in the world. She explained that many children on the autism spectrum were incredibly intelligent and talented, but they needed different kinds of support to thrive in social and educational environments. Emma's need for routine, her sensory sensitivities, her difficulty with transitions and social interactions, her incredible focus on details and patterns, all of these were common characteristics of autism in young children, especially girls who were often underdiagnosed. Mrs. Henderson had prepared a comprehensive packet of information for me, including contact details for pediatric developmental specialists, resources for parents, and research articles about autism in girls. She explained that girls on the spectrum often presented differently than boys, masking their struggles better, and flying under the radar until their challenges became more apparent in social settings like school. The conversation that I'd been dreading as a potential disaster turned into the most helpful and hopeful discussion I'd had about Emma in months. Mrs. Henderson wasn't asking me to remove Emma from the daycare. Instead, she was offering to work with me to create a more supportive environment for my daughter while I navigated the process of getting a formal evaluation. She outlined specific accommodations that could help Emma succeed at daycare, like providing advance warning about schedule changes, offering a quiet space where she could retreat when overwhelmed, and modifying activities to reduce sensory overload. She also suggested connecting me with other parents who had children with similar needs, breaking through the isolation I'd been feeling. But the most powerful moment came when Mrs. Henderson showed me a portfolio she'd been secretly compiling of Emma's work. While other children were creating typical preschool art with handprints and finger paintings, Emma had been producing intricate patterns and designs that showed incredible spatial reasoning and attention to detail. Her puzzle completion times were off the charts, and she'd invented complex organizational systems for classroom materials that actually improved how the other children could find and use supplies. Mrs. Henderson explained that Emma wasn't failing to engage with her environment. She was engaging with it in her own unique and valuable way. The key was helping her develop skills to navigate social situations while celebrating and nurturing her particular strengths and interests. Instead of trying to force Emma into a neurotypical mold, the goal was to help her succeed as her authentic self. Walking out of that meeting, I felt like I could breathe fully for the first time in months. The letter Mrs. Henderson had prepared for me contained all the documentation she'd gathered about Emma's behaviors and needs, formatted specifically to help with getting a developmental evaluation. It wasn't a letter of complaint or dismissal. It was a love letter to my daughter's unique mind and a roadmap for getting her the support she needed. The evaluation process took several weeks, involving appointments with a developmental pediatrician, a child psychologist, and various specialists who observed Emma in different settings. Each professional confirmed what Mrs. Henderson had suspected. Emma was indeed on the autism spectrum, specifically what would now be classified as Autism Spectrum Disorder Level 1, requiring support but not intensive intervention. The diagnosis was both validating and overwhelming. Validating because it explained so much about Emma's experiences and my struggles as her parent. Overwhelming because it meant learning an entirely new vocabulary and navigating systems I'd never imagined I'd need to understand. But with Mrs. Henderson's support and the resources she provided, I didn't feel alone in the process. The transformation in Emma's daycare experience was remarkable once everyone understood her needs. Her teachers learned to give her advance notice about changes in routine, provided sensory breaks when she became overwhelmed, and found ways to incorporate her interests and patterns and organization into group activities. Instead of forcing her to participate in overwhelming sensory play, they offered alternatives that still promoted the same developmental goals in ways that worked for her brain. Most importantly, Emma began to thrive socially in her own way. She might not engage in typical preschooler play, but she found her niche helping other children with puzzles and organizing materials. Her unique perspective became an asset rather than a challenge, and she started forming genuine friendships with children who appreciated her loyalty, honesty, and interesting way of seeing the world. The other parents' attitudes began to shift too, especially after Mrs. Henderson organized an informal information session about neurodiversity and different learning styles. Instead of viewing Emma as problematic, parents began to see her as a valued member of the classroom community. Some even commented on how Emma's methodical approach to activities helped their own children slow down and pay attention to details they might otherwise miss. My relationship with Emma deepened as I learned to understand and support her neurological differences. Instead of fighting against her need for routine, I embraced it and found ways to make necessary changes more manageable for her. Instead of seeing her sensory sensitivities as pickiness, I worked to create environments where she could be comfortable and successful. The guilt and self-doubt that had consumed me for months gradually gave way to pride and advocacy. Emma wasn't a problem to be solved. She was a unique individual with her own strengths and challenges, just like every child. My job as her parent wasn't to make her neurotypical, but to help her navigate the world as her authentic self while building on her considerable strengths. 6 months after receiving Mrs. Henderson's letter, Emma was not only thriving at daycare, but had become something of a classroom celebrity for her puzzle-solving skills and her ability to notice details that others missed. She developed a small but close circle of friends who appreciated her unique qualities, and her teachers regularly commented on her progress in developing coping strategies for challenging situations. The daycare experience that had once filled me with dread became something I looked forward to. Pickup time meant hearing about Emma's latest achievements and innovations, seeing her face light up when she showed me a particularly complex pattern she'd created, or listening to her teachers describe how she'd helped solve a classroom problem with her different way of thinking. Mrs. Henderson became not just Emma's advocate but mine as well, checking in regularly about how I was adjusting to parenting a child with autism and connecting me with resources and support groups that helped me continue learning and growing alongside Emma. She helped me understand that having a child with autism wasn't a limitation on our family's future, but simply a different path that came with its own unique joys and challenges. The letter that had initially terrified me had become the catalyst for the most important transformation in our family's life. It led to understanding, support, appropriate interventions, and most importantly, acceptance of Emma exactly as she was. Instead of trying to change her to fit the world, we learned to help her navigate the world as her authentic self. Today, Emma is a confident, happy child who knows that her brain works differently, and that this difference is something to be celebrated rather than hidden. She's learned strategies for managing overwhelming situations, developed strong friendships with children who value her unique perspective, and continues to amaze everyone with her incredible attention to detail and pattern recognition. The experience taught me that sometimes what feels like our worst parenting moment can actually be the beginning of our best understanding of our child. The letter I thought would destroy our daycare experience actually gave us the tools and knowledge we needed to help Emma succeed. Mrs. Henderson's careful observations and compassionate approach transformed what could have been a devastating diagnosis into an empowering roadmap for supporting Emma's development. Looking back, I realized that all those months of worry and self-doubt were actually my maternal instincts recognizing that Emma needed something different, something more than what I knew how to provide at the time. Instead of failing her, my concerns led me to advocate for her in ways that ultimately gave her exactly what she needed to thrive. The other parents who once seemed judgmental became some of our strongest supporters once they understood Emma's challenges and celebrated her successes. Children who had initially found Emma confusing or different became her loyal friends, appreciating her honesty, her interesting insights, and her unique way of playing and interacting. Emma's success story isn't about overcoming autism or becoming neurotypical. It's about a child learning to understand herself, developing tools to navigate challenges, and finding environments where her particular strengths are valued and nurtured. It's about a family learning to celebrate neurodiversity and advocate for their child's needs without shame or apology. The letter from Mrs. Henderson didn't just change Emma's trajectory at daycare. It changed our entire family's understanding of what it means to be different in a world that often expects conformity. We learned that different doesn't mean less than, that challenges can coexist with incredible strengths, and that the right support can help any child reach their full potential. Now, when I see other parents struggling with children who seem to march to the beat of their own drum, I think of that letter and how it transformed our lives. I want to tell them that their instincts matter, that their child's differences might be strengths in disguise, and that finding the right support and understanding can make all the difference in the world. Emma's story continues to unfold every day, filled with new achievements, discoveries, and moments of pure joy in her unique way of experiencing the world. The letter that once seemed like it might end her daycare journey actually became the beginning of her journey toward understanding herself and finding her place in a world that's learning to celebrate all kinds of minds. If this story resonates with you, please share it with other parents who might be struggling with similar challenges. Sometimes we all need to be reminded that our children are perfect exactly as they are, even when the world doesn't immediately understand their unique gifts. Don't forget to subscribe and share your own experiences in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what another parent needs to hear today.